High in the mountains of Peru, where stone remembers and the air carries older worlds, lies the city of Cusco, a place that seems to exist between time and dream. And this is where our story begins.
I don't even know where to begin this terrible story. What happened that night still doesn't fit in my head. Since then, my hair has gone gray. Yes, don't be surprised. After what happened, I, a 24-year-old guy, turned gray like an old man. This story left its mark on me for the rest of my days. I suppose I'll start from the very beginning, from that ill-fated evening when I was standing at the station buying a ticket to Cusco, Peru. The station was almost empty. Outside the windows, the wind was raging, cutting through my clothes and chilling my whole body, so I had no desire to go outside again. Why was I going to Cusco? My grandmother lived there, and just a week earlier she had died, something wrong with her heart. I hadn't seen her for 3 years, so I didn't know or understand much, and then suddenly I got a call and was told the sad news. The neighbors, apparently. Well, what could be done? I had to go. Otherwise, they would have buried her themselves, the neighbors, I mean. They called me because I was the only heir, and I was supposed to receive her little old apartment on the outskirts of the city. That's the short version. I don't see the point in going on about who I am, what, and why. So, after buying my ticket, I left the station building and went outside, since my train was already standing at the platform. I waited for the other passengers. There weren't many of them, maybe 10 people. I saw them boarding the cars. Probably half of them were just seeing someone off. In general, trains had been a part of my whole childhood. My mother had worked all her life on the railway as a conductor, and I very often traveled with her on long routes. I liked it. The clatter of wheels, tea and glass holders, various sweets that the management made the conductors sell. My mother raised me alone, so where could she leave me by myself? She would be gone for 5 days, sometimes a week, and there was no one to leave me with, so I traveled with her. And so it happened that my mother worked her whole life on the railway, and that's where it ended. I was 17 then. According to eyewitnesses and later the police, there was an accident. My mother was climbing into a carriage when the train suddenly started moving. She lost her grip and fell. I don't know exactly how she fell, but the wheels cut her. It was a terrible death. Whenever I board a train, I always remember my mother. It was the same that time. I entered the carriage and walked along it to my seat, number 21. It was an upper berth. Oh, I forgot to say, it was a Platzkart carriage, and I had almost a full day to travel. The train didn't stand long. Literally, as soon as I found my place, it started moving. There were very few people in the carriage, almost empty, which was good. At least it would be possible to walk freely to the toilet without bumping into someone's stinking feet, and there wouldn't be snoring all night or drunken chatter. Although, who knows, maybe more passengers would board later. For now, everything was calm. I didn't want to sleep. I had drunk coffee at the station, so I just sat at the little table and stared out the window at the passing black silhouettes of trees. The knocking of the wheels echoed in my ears and was music to me. I didn't even feel like taking out my headphones. Besides, as the train moved farther from the backwater town where I lived, the internet and mobile signal disappeared, so staring out the window was the best option. About 20 minutes later, a young female conductor came up to me, brought bed linen and offered tea. Of course, I didn't refuse. While she was making the tea, I took a cigarette and, swaying slightly, went to the vestibule. On the way, I realized that there were only 5 other people in the carriage, 2 old women, 1 young guy, and apparently a husband and wife, both rather heavy-set. The guy was already dozing. One of the old women was staring blankly somewhere, and the couple had begun taking food out of their bags and setting up a meal. The smell wasn't great, to be honest. I went out into the vestibule and lit my cigarette. As I stood there, I noticed something interesting. The door to the neighboring carriage was open. I looked inside and realized that the carriage was empty. The lights weren't even on. Strange. Why would they attach an empty carriage? Although, who knows, maybe they needed it in Cusco or somewhere else, or maybe passengers would board later, I reassured myself. I finished my cigarette, opened the outer door to throw the butt away, and just then, a figure, like that of a person, flashed into my field of vision. It was as if someone had run from the direction of the toilet into the darkness, quickly, abruptly. I didn't even understand what I'd seen. I stood there staring into the window with the extinguished cigarette in my hand. Had something rustled? No. Someone had definitely run there. Maybe it was a conductor who'd forgotten something. But why would they travel without lights? Saving electricity, probably. Throwing the butt away, I went back to my seat. In our carriage, they were probably saving electricity too. The light was so dim that if they had turned it off completely, I wouldn't have noticed much difference. I drank my tea, warmed up nicely, stared out the window a little longer, and gradually began to drift off when the conductor came up, woke me, and said, "You're not sleeping, young man?" And she said it in such a tone, almost reproachful. "Why not?" I asked. "You can't sleep now. We'll pass a certain place, and then you can lie down, but not now." "Miss, are you all right?" She really did look anxious. "Yes, everything's fine." "And what place are we supposed to pass?" "A bad place," she said quietly, adjusted her shirt, and walked further down the carriage, evidently to warn the others. I stopped her. "Miss, one more question." "Yes, of course. What about the neighboring carriage? Are they saving electricity there or something?" "Are they?" she asked. "Well, it looks empty, and there's no light. They're probably already sleeping there." But it was clear she was hiding something. Maybe she was just overworked, poor thing. Still, I couldn't help noticing that she looked completely different from how she had when I boarded the train, disturbed, and quite strongly so. She went on down the carriage. I watched her closely. After speaking with the other passengers, she opened the vestibule door and went, evidently, to another carriage. Judging by the laughter and continuing chatter at the far end, nobody had taken her words seriously, myself included. And that was a mistake. After sitting for about 10 minutes and not waiting for the conductor to return, I began drifting off again. What happened next, I'll try to describe. I fell asleep, and then I woke up, what felt like 3 or 3.5 hours later. Next to me, on the neighboring berth, someone was lying there. Still sleepy, I looked out of my compartment. The carriage was full, not packed, but people were lying on the bunks. Silence, just the knocking of wheels and the howling of wind outside. I thought maybe passengers had boarded at some station. I lay back down and heard that the one lying on the neighboring bunk was whispering something. Curled up, turned to the wall, whispering. I thought, who knows, maybe talking in his sleep. But suddenly he turned toward me, and I doubted that it was even a human being. I doubted it because only his upper half turned toward me. His legs remained as they were. The sheet covering him slowly began turning red. His face looked ordinary, human, but I felt that it was a damned corpse. I woke instantly. Sleep vanished as if it had never existed. I grabbed my bag and went into the corridor of the carriage, almost ran to the end. And then I realized I had stumbled into something devilish. There was no other way to explain what was happening in that cursed carriage. People were lying on the bunks, but something strange was happening to them. One old woman was just turning over extremely fast, and it felt as if she were spinning in the air under the sheet. Someone lay with their mouth open, open so wide that a living person's jaw could never open like that. Goosebumps ran over me, my head began to spin, and on almost every bunk, some kind of nightmare was happening. But the worst was ahead. I quietly moved toward the exit into the vestibule, opened the door, turned back, and was stunned. The carriage began to change before my eyes. It began to rust. The bunks fell apart together with the passengers. The linoleum on the floor cracked and curled. But even that was nothing compared to what stood at the opposite end of the carriage. It was something resembling a person, but it clearly wasn't one. It was naked, horribly thin. I didn't manage to get a good look at its face, as if there was none at all. Its neck was twisted to one side, but the most terrible thing were its hands. On each of them were 3 or 4 fingers, each about half a meter long, hanging down almost to the floor. Wild terror seized me. Hoping it was just a dream, I slapped myself hard on the cheeks, but it wasn't a dream. It was reality, some kind of parallel reality. I stood in the vestibule, frozen for a minute, and then that thing ran from the far end of the carriage straight towards me in seconds. At that moment, I thought I would faint from fear, and it would have been better if I had, but I didn't. It leapt against the glass of the door, bracing itself on those half-meter fingers, and stared at me. I was trembling, my heart hammered like a jackhammer. It looked at me as if examining a piece of meat. I stood there for about 10 seconds. Then it began pounding on the glass. The door was closed and it couldn't reach me, but when it started trying to break the glass, I remembered the emergency brake. I pulled it. At once I heard the squeal of wheels and felt the train slowing. Without thinking long, I opened the door and jumped out of the carriage onto the ground. And in that same second, I jerked upward and smashed the back of my head against the metal frame of my upper berth.
I was still on the train. The carriage hadn't rusted. The bunks hadn't collapsed. No long-fingered creature was pounding on the glass. I lay there, breathing heavily, clutching the edge of the mattress. The dim yellow light of the carriage was steady and calm. The wheels knocked rhythmically beneath me. The wind howled faintly outside, but everything was ordinary. Too ordinary. For a moment, I didn't understand where I was. Then memory returned in fragments. The conductor's warning, the whispering voice, the red sheet, the twisted neck. I slowly leaned over the edge of the berth and looked down. On the neighboring lower bunk lay a man. He was awake, bald, pale, not just pale, but almost gray. Tall, even while lying down, his limbs seemed unnaturally long, very thin, and calmly sitting on his chest was a black cat. The cat's eyes reflected the weak carriage light with a dull yellow shine. Its tail flicked lazily across the blanket. The man stared straight ahead, not at anything in particular, just ahead. I stayed frozen for a few seconds. Then I carefully sat up. "Good morning," I said, my voice hoarse. No response. The man did not even blink. The cat, however, turned its head slowly and looked me directly. A completely ordinary black cat, smooth fur, thin tail, calm purring. And suddenly a thought pierced me like a needle. What if it was the cat moving under the blanket? What if when I woke up in the night and saw the body twisting, the upper half turning without the legs moving, it had simply been the cat shifting beneath the sheet, climbing over its owner, pressing against the fabric so that the fabric rose and fell strangely. My heart was still pounding, but reason was trying to push its way through. Maybe the whispering I heard was just the sound of wheels blending with half-sleep. Maybe the red spreading across the sheet was just a shadow from the passing signal lights. The cat stretched and quietly jumped down to the floor, brushing against the table's leg as it passed. I nearly flinched. The man slowly sat up. He moved stiffly, as if every joint resisted. For a second, just a second, his neck tilted slightly to the side in a way that made my stomach tighten. Then it straightened. He stood up, tall, much taller than I expected. He took the cat into his arms. The animal settled against him without a sound. He simply stood there, holding the cat, waiting. Other passengers were beginning to stir. The old women yawned. The heavy-set couple argued softly over tea. Everything was normal, completely normal. The conductor passed through the carriage. She looked just as she had the evening before, young, a little tired, but nothing unusual. When she saw me awake, she smiled politely. "Almost there," she said. Her voice was steady, no tension, no warning about bad places. I wanted to ask her whether we had passed anything unusual in the night, whether the train had slowed suddenly, whether someone had pulled the emergency brake, but I didn't. For the rest of the morning, the man did not say a single word, not to me, not to anyone. When the conductor checked tickets, he handed them over silently. When she wished him a good morning, he did not respond. Maybe he was just mute. As the train approached the next station, relief began to replace the tightness in my chest. The night was over. Daylight flooded through the windows. The trees no longer looked like black silhouettes, but ordinary forest. I packed my things quickly, almost impatiently. When the train stopped, I stepped down onto the platform with a strange mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. I turned back for a moment. The bald man was standing in the doorway of the carriage, the black cat in his arms, watching the platform. I forced myself to look away. "Goodbye," I said to the conductor girl as she stood by the steps. "Have a good day," she replied with a friendly nod. I stepped onto the platform fully and moved away from the train. Only when the carriage doors closed and the train began to move again did I finally allow myself to breathe freely. It had just been a dream. And yet, even now, I cannot say with certainty whether everything that happened that night was only born in my sleeping mind, or whether that night I glimpsed something that exists somewhere on the thin boundary between sleep and waking.